Hey guys, it's Dasha. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to my June wrap-up where I'm gonna go over the 5 books I read in the month of June. I read some fantasy, some nonfiction, some horror, and as usual, I'm gonna go in my order from my least favorite to my favorite. So let's go ahead and start off with the first book. My least favorite book this month was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Y'all, I am so sorry. This was not for me. This is the story of Addie, a young woman in 18th century France who is forced into an arranged marriage that she does not want. On the day of her wedding, she is desperate. She runs into the woods and prays to any god who will listen. But the one that answers her is the god of darkness and the night and of death, and the deal that he gives her in exchange for her freedom comes with a twist. Addie gets to live forever, see everything that she wants to see, but nobody will remember her the second they turn around. She is gone from their memory. I found this book honestly super underwhelming. Now, it achieved what it was trying to. It is a grand, sweeping story of the 300 years of Addie's life as she navigates the world while being forgotten. It speaks of things like loneliness and all of our fears about being forgotten in the grand scheme of time and being ignored by those that we fall for and those that we treasure. But in the end, I did not care at all. I didn't feel what everyone else felt. I did not feel compelled to even keep reading it all that often. The only things that kept me reading was the fact that I own the book. I actually pre-ordered it before it came out. And the fact that everyone really loved the ending. A lot of people cried. So I was like, okay, let me keep pushing and get to the end and see what this incredible ending is. And I just didn't feel anything. I can't explain specifically why I feel so ambivalent about it. I know there are these like grand themes that everyone should be able to relate to, but I just didn't give a shit. I felt that it got very repetitive with these themes because it felt like they were getting shoved down your throat a lot. I thought that the logic was kind of shaky, honestly. I didn't really understand all the time. I thought that Henry and Addie were actually like super flat characters. I thought there was nothing remarkable about them, and maybe that was the point. But it didn't really work when you're supposed to feel for them because it is very character focused. I also thought that it just, in terms of the general plot line, it got really, really repetitive. And the writing was beautiful. I really don't want to knock it because when it comes to that aspect, it's fantastic. But it just, the writing got repetitive because you're dealing with all these scenes that are supposed to be different, but it's all Addie running around in France or Italy being upset that a man that she likes or a man that she connects to does not remember her. And after a while, you just get fucking sick of it, honestly. And on that note, can someone explain to me how the hell Addie has lived 300 years and has only left Europe once to go to the US? Cindy from With Cindy did a great video talking about this, so I will link it down below because she goes really, really in depth on this idea and presents kind of both sides as to maybe why V. Schwab chose not to include a single other continent. But quite frankly, this really grated on my nerves because I'm sure if you give most people 300 years to live, 300 plus years, they're going to see something else. Even if they have Addie's curse where she's forgotten immediately, I'm pretty sure you would at least go somewhere other than just all around Europe and a couple of cities in the US. I think that was just, quite frankly, a bad decision, and Cindy puts forth the idea that it's possibly because if V.E. Schwab had mentioned other places by name, it would seem like she is trying to pander and trying to make it seem like Addie is like cultured and not just interested in like Europe and Western culture. Like I said, like if you give most people 300 years, most of us would think immediately of traveling to all these places and getting all these new experiences, even if you're not remembered by these people. I think that is such a key element because also Addie wants to escape her marriage because she does not want to be stuck in the same small town in France her whole life. She wants to see other things. She wants to meet other people and experience all these other things. She is endlessly curious, we are told, and not able to sit still. So why the hell is she constantly stuck in Europe? It blows my mind, honestly, that most of the time when she traveled, it was because of the god that she made her deal with, even within Europe. And I just like, that grated on me to no end. I can't explain why, but once I saw it, I could not unsee it, and it honestly just really hindered the reading experience. I can't put my finger on why it bothers me so much. I just think it is kind of odd and it makes Addie even more unlikable. I'm not saying it makes sense. I'm not saying my feelings towards this book make sense at all. I'm just saying I was disappointed. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars ultimately because I was just really let down. I had high hopes, but I just didn't really think anything of it. It was utterly forgettable to me, honestly. And even though there was like the good writing, even the good writing got repetitive. The premise was kind of cool, but there's things that could have gone further, that could have been taken in different directions, and ultimately it was just a very disappointing and middle of the road book for me, unfortunately. So the next book I want to talk about is An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. Funnily enough, this is actually a reread, and my rating changed once I reread it. This was also a buddy read with Nat from Nerdy Nat Reads. I will link her channel down below. She is a great time. This is a young adult fantasy about Laia and Elias. So Laia is a scholar, which is the kind of oppressed class in this ancient Roman-inspired empire. One day her whole family is ripped from her and her brother is taken off to prison, and she decides that she is going to help the rebels in exchange for getting her brother back. So she infiltrates the military academy in her city in order to gain intel for the rebels in order to get her brother back in exchange. Elias, on the other hand, is one of the marshals, which is the ruling class of this empire, and he's actually studying at this military academy to become an elite soldier, but his heart is not in it. He feels like the empire is doing things he personally doesn't agree with, and he's almost thinking of just deserting and leaving everything behind because it is not what he feels in his heart is right to do. Their paths cross, chaos ensues, there's a lot of political intrigue and a lot of really great world building, and it's honestly a very, very dark book for young adult, which is right up my alley. I really enjoyed the fast-paced plot of this. I thought that there was just enough hints being dropped to keep you intrigued and guessing and interested. There's a lot of political intrigue and military stuff going on that I'm personally a really big fan of. There's also some magic in this world, but it's integrated in a really interesting way. So our main characters themselves do not have any magical abilities that we know of, but there is magic all around them. There are these magical creatures, ifrits and jinns, and all of these kind of weird happenings going on that the characters are kind of involved in, but it's not a focal point. The focal point is really the characters and the politics and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of a different approach to the fantasy. The focus is really off the magic. You can tell that Sabaa Tahir is really building up for more of this magic being a part of the series because it is a quartet. There's 4 books, so there's bound to be more of the magic. But I like that it's not a focal point. I like that we really get some character development and plot setup and some other things going on. I will say I did not love the characters this time around. Like Laia really annoyed me. I found that certain relationships were better off left platonic, but they were kind of romantic in this book. There was almost a love square going on, and like, you guys know I'm not a huge romance person, so take this with a grain of salt, but I genuinely felt that a lot of the relationships in this book were better served as friendships and focused maybe on just one romantic relationship, because what happened is that there was a lot of angst injected into the book that was unnecessary, I felt, because what you have going on with the politics and the world and the magic is so interesting that the angst and the kind of teenage heartache really took away from those really incredible elements. That's not to say that I don't enjoy the romantic elements of this at all. I think there are definitely some strong points in it, but overall I felt that it was kind of unnecessary, and it might just be a byproduct of the time that this book was released in. I think the first one was released in 2015. Yeah, 2015. So obviously that's what audiences want, right? They want the angst and they wanted that kind of romance but set in like a different world, and I think while the world itself is really well built, I thought that the romances really kind of detracted from it. That being said, I would still absolutely recommend this book and this series. I think it is really well built. I think that it is very well written. I think that I'm going to enjoy the rest of the series. I am going to be continuing it. I have a really strong feeling that the politics and everything is just going to keep being built up to this like beautiful crescendo that I'm really excited for. So I gave this 3 stars. First time I read it was a 4-star, but I kind of found a few more things that I didn't like about it. But that doesn't matter because 3 stars is still a good rating, and I still want to read the rest of the series. And I'm really enjoying my time reading this. It's really quick. It's a really good palate cleanser in between some of my heavier reads like the adult fantasy and the nonfiction and horror and stuff. So it's really good for that. And overall, like I said, I would recommend it. It's not a bad book by any means. There's just a few kind of annoying things about it. The next book I want to talk about is Jade City by Fonda Lee. I buddy read this with Ray and Robin, and interestingly enough, we all had somewhat different experiences with this book. This is an adult fantasy set in this like fantastical Asian Asia. You're mainly in one city, but there's a little bit of surrounding areas, and you are following a bunch of people in this clan. It is like a crime family essentially, and they kind of run the city and they hold a lot of power, but power in this world equates to jade. Jade is a magical stone that gives its wearer these kind of superhuman abilities. They're super fast, they're great fighters, they can kind of sense other people's auras. The problem is not everyone can wield jade, and it is mostly the people within these powerful clans that can wield it. So trouble absolutely does arise. War is brewing, people are starting to conspire, and everything that these clans know will fall apart very soon. This book has gotten fantastic reviews across the board, and I definitely went into it knowing that, thinking that it was going to be like really up my alley. Unfortunately, I didn't love it. I felt like for every positive I had, there was kind of a negative. Like the beginning was really, really good, and then it just kind of took this weird turn I didn't like. And then the writing was pretty good. Like it was very clear, but it was also really dry. And then there was these really, really cool action and fight scenes, and I heard that it's due to Fonda Lee being a martial arts expert herself. So she's really, really good at writing these cool and understandable action scenes. But every time something would go down, the characters would like stop and take so much time to dissect everything that happened, and we had to see all the ramifications. And I understand that it's a bit of a different pace for most fantasy books. We normally don't get to see the after effects of horrendous events and battles and all this kind of stuff, but in this case it threw the pacing all the way off, and it just really didn't work for me. I also thought that while the characters had some interesting relationships and dynamics, because you are following these crime families and you're also following a lot of political stuff, there were some really interesting dynamics and conversations happening and relationships forming. But when you look at the characters themselves, I thought that they were kind of very surface level. There were a lot of archetypes that didn't end up being anything else. I found it really hard to root for any of them, really. Overall, I'm just really upset that I didn't like this as much as everyone else did, and I really truly wanted to. I settled on a 3-star rating for this because it is by no means a bad book. I'm just not interested enough to keep reading, and I honestly was kind of disappointed with my reading experience. But it's fine. Not every fantasy book is gonna be for me. And like I said, I would still recommend this to you if you like those kind of crime family dramas and you like magic. What a douchebag. If you like those kind of magical substances and almost like an urban fantasy setting, but with that kind of introduction of magic and politics and all this interesting stuff, it's definitely still worth a read if you are interested in it. It just didn't work for me. The next book I want to talk about is On Killing by Dave Grossman. So this is a nonfiction kind of exploring the psychological effects that the brain experiences when killing another human being, how soldiers decide whether to kill or not to kill in combat, and all of the kind of biological processes that your body goes through. It's honestly really, really interesting. So this was on my 5-star predictions, and while it was not a full 5 stars, it was honestly pretty solid. And if you haven't seen my 5-star predictions list, I will absolutely link it because I do go in depth into why I thought I would like this book. So if you want to watch that and then come back, that'd be kind of fun. So most things I thought that I was going to like about this, I did. It was informative, it was thought-provoking, it definitely shifted the way I think about combat and war when we look at certain situations in history. Oftentimes you have a very one-dimensional view in terms of you often have just a very fact-based approach, but this definitely made me stop and reconsider things from a different angle. There was a lot of facts and situations here that I've never heard of that I was really interested. I mean, it's tabbed up. It was really insightful, and it definitely expanded my understanding of war and combat and what soldiers have to experience in war. I found it got a little bit repetitive. I feel like I get that with a lot of my nonfiction that I pick up. I feel like most of these books can be just edited down so much because they either repeat the same idea over and over as if they're trying to drill it into your head, or they just repeat like the same sentence literally, and that's kind of what happened in here, which got kind of draining, not gonna lie. The other thing I really didn't like about this was I have an updated and expanded and whatever revised edition, so it features a bit more recent events and technological advancements, I guess you could call it. So there is a section that talks about desensitizing society to killing, because one of the overarching themes of this book is talking about how prior to the Vietnam War, soldiers' firing rates were really, really low. A lot of soldiers refused to kill or tried to find ways around killing in combat. Whereas after the Vietnam War, something shifted and most soldiers had engaged in warfare in combat. Whether it was with their guns or some other kind of weapon, there was always some kind of combat, and that was not the case previously. And so the author chalks this up to a variety of things: army training conditions and the way that they kind of shifted their perspective on training soldiers for combat. But another thing that he talked about was desensitization of society to killing, and this is honestly where he kind of lost me, because in the updated section he talks about violent video games and movies, and it honestly really came off as slightly boomerish. I'm not gonna lie. I understand that from a psychology standpoint that could be argued that these kinds of violent media are desensitizing us to killing, but I don't know if it's a sound argument, because you could argue, for example, that back in the Roman days, where there was also similar level of combat engagement, obviously it wasn't with guns, so it was a lot harder to figure out like a firing rate, but in terms of combat engagement, you could argue that the Romans had a lot of brutality. Most people were killed for committing crimes, there was gladiator fights, there was just a lot of death all around constantly. And I don't think people were desensitized to it. So I don't know if I would necessarily draw that connection between violent video games and people getting better at killing in combat. I think that's kind of a very boomerish perspective, if you ask me. But that was just like a small section in the back. And like overall, I didn't agree with everything he said, but the point was to get a different perspective on combat and killing. And this did deliver on that front. And I thought it was just purely fantastic. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars because, like I said, there was a few things that kind of nagged at me, but it is a book I will absolutely reread and come back to. It is a book that I will keep thinking about for sure when I read about warfare. It just didn't have the same emotional impact on me that Kilo did, which is what I was hoping for. The final book I want to talk about is The Shining by Stephen King. This is a horror novel about a young family that moves into a hotel in the wilderness since the father, Jack, got a job as the caretaker for the winter. So all the guests are gone, they are cut off from the rest of the world, and Jack is basically tasked with just upkeeping the hotel, making sure it's ready for the spring when guests start to arrive. The problem is they are all battling their own inner demons, and the hotel seems pretty determined to act on those demons and make them all turn against one another. This was fucking phenomenal. Absolutely fantastic. Sometimes I read Stephen King and I'm like, why the hell are you considered like the most prolific horror writer? You suck. You suck. You're not that good. And then I read stuff like this and Misery and Pet Sematary, and I'm like, I'm here for all of it. I am a Stephen King stan. This was incredible, beautiful, show-stopping. I could read this every day until I die and I'd be happy. The tension in this book, the character work in this, it's just everything just worked together so well. The setting, the atmosphere, the way you started questioning your own sanity when reading this, because the characters are all unreliable narrators. Jack is dealing with an alcohol problem, Wendy is dealing with a lot of insecurities herself, and then Danny, their son, is dealing with his own intelligence and some kind of psychological thing he's got going on, and then the hotel is playing off all of them, and it just works so incredibly well. And I typically haven't enjoyed haunted house stories when I've read them. There's usually either really weird twists in the modern ones, or they just follow very similar tropes and have similar character archetypes, but this worked so well. I don't know if it was because maybe there was that family dynamic instead, where all of the characters were dealing with their own demons but had to remain as a family unit, so there was stronger attachments. I think that that really is what helped in this case, because overall the way that the hotel played off every single one of them in a different way, and how it ended up developing, and how the tension was just set just right, was just absolutely phenomenal. And honestly, Stephen King's endings are very hit or miss. I did not mind this one at all. I thought it was pretty good, and this book was a 5 out of 5 star for me. Absolutely fantastic. I don't really have a lot of complaints about it. I thought it was just absolutely great. I want to really quickly mention a book that I started in June, and I got a large chunk of the way through. I started The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. As you can see, I am 2/3 of the way done. This is a fantasy about Vin and Kelsey. So Vin is a young street urchin in this world. She is considered kind of like just dirty and lower class citizen, but she is harboring some powers that even she doesn't know about. Kelsey, on the other hand, is a rebel. He is a thief. He is throwing everything he has against the final empire, which is the kind of really strict government in this world. There is the Lord Ruler, who has been alive for 1,000 years, and he is basically immortal. It is impossible to kill him and overthrow the final empire. But Kelsier and Vin finally get to meet, and everything just goes downhill from there. They're discovering their powers, because in this world you can ingest different metals, and these metals give you different abilities. So Kelsier and Vin are able to ingest some of these and do these crazy things, and they're really invaluable to this effort of trying to rebel against the Empire. I'm really loving this so far. I can absolutely see why everyone praises Brandon Sanderson for world building and magic systems. As far as characters go, I'm still warming up to everyone. Kelsier is like my favorite character archetype of all time. He is one of those characters like Kaz and Nikolai from the Grishaverse, or like Locke Lamora from the Gentleman Bastards. He's one of those crazy masterminds that everyone's like, okay, you're gone off the rocker, you're wild, dude, but we're still gonna follow you because you know what you're doing, and everything always works out for you somehow because you're meticulously organized and you've got everything planned out. And like, I love that trope. I absolutely love that kind of character, and Kelsier is giving like big vibes of that, and I absolutely I'm like loving that aspect of it. Vin, I'm still trying to like warm up to, but overall I'm really enjoying reading this. Like I said, I'm 2/3 of the way, so like I think I can like talk about it a little bit, and I'm really excited to see where this goes. I will absolutely continue this series because I am just absolutely hooked. I'm able to just like tear through this when I do have time to sit down and read it because I'm loving this so much. And that is it. That was the 5 books I completed in the month of June, plus one that I started and got a chunk of the way through. Let me know if you've read any of these and if you've liked them. I'm sure people will have some opinions about me not liking Addie LaRue. I can just tell it's coming, and that's fine. I welcome it. Tell me what you liked about it. If you like that and Jade City and Ember in the Ashes, if you guys love those books, tell me what you like about them. I'd love to know what spoke to you from those books. My social media is linked down below. You guys can always come talk to me there, and otherwise, I will see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!